Friday the 13th, Kill No More, written by Paul Ramos. Several years have passed since the grisly murders took place at Camp Crystal Lake. Locals say it was the mass killer, Jason Voorhees, that took countless lives to quench his bloodlust. Some say it was Tommy Jarvis. No one knows the truth really. Only the many victims know the truth, but their blood cries out in vain. Most people are too afraid to step foot near the former campgrounds of Camp Blood, some have dubbed it, save for a few unfortunate souls. Anyone that dared to venture has never returned. One day a family decided to buy the property despite its dark history and hoped for a brighter future. On its opening night, only a handful of children were registered to stay for the summer. They sit around a campfire and sing songs and make merry. All the clamor and merriment awoke Jason from his dormant state and disturbed him once again. As he awakes, he hears the voice of his mother call to him. "Kill them, Jason. Make them pay for what they've done to Mommy. Make Mommy proud." Jason then grabs a machete that was conveniently next to him and makes his way toward the camp. He makes it to the camp and stares at everyone from a distance. Thoughts of malice and death bellow in his mind as he waits for a chance to strike. It was 10 p.m. and the children were getting ready for bed. Most of them were exhausted from the day and fell asleep rather quickly. It's now 1 a.m. and Jason begins to make his move. He enters a cabin and looks for young teenagers as his next victims. Although one of them was assigned to watch over this particular cabin, she decided to sneak out and go 2 cabins down to her boyfriend's cabin and leave the children behind. 3 children were there and 2 of them were fast asleep. As he stalked the cabin, one of the children was up and saw Jason come in. Jason was oblivious to him for a moment till they made eye contact. As Jason noticed, he at first became abrasive and then he noticed something. The boy that looked back was disabled and wheelchair bound. He had many deformities and lacked any rationale or fear. He smiled at Jason and Jason came closer to him. Jason kneeled down to get a closer look and he had a strange feeling come over him. While Jason was examining him, the child stroked his mask. Jason has never at this point met anyone that wasn't afraid of him. He began to have flashbacks of himself as a child. All the children would either mock a bully or fear him and would make him feel terrible. The child tried to pull his mask off and Jason decided to take it off for him. The child then touched Jason's deformed face and smiled. Jason then held the boy's hand for a moment and looked at him. The boy then said, "Friend." As soon as he heard that word, an overwhelming feeling, which he had never felt before, trembled in him. Never once in his existence has anyone called him a friend. All he knew was his mother's love and the ugliness of the world. Jason then released his hand and slowly walked away. He looked back, and the boy cried and reached out to him. Jason couldn't handle this new feeling and left. As he left, the boy began to cry and woke up the other children. The female counselor then returned to the cabin and heard the commotion. "Friend! Friend!" the boy cried, and she consoled him. Jason was watching from the window and saw her compassion. The next day, all the children were playing by the lake, and the boy that was wheelchair bound was sitting next to the female counselor. She had her arm around his shoulder and held him close as if he were her own. Jason once again was watching from a distance and noticed this. The voice of his mother began to grow silent as he witnessed her compassion towards his new friend. The boy then suddenly noticed he was watching and yelled, "Friend! Friend!" The counselor then looked and Jason was nowhere to be seen. The counselor then said, "Hey Jimmy, who are you talking to? I don't see anyone over there." Jimmy then looked at her and smiled. As Jason walked away, he knew what he had to do. He had to visit Jimmy one more time. Later that night, the counselor went to her boyfriend's cabin again. Jason returned to Jimmy's cabin to go see him. Jimmy was happy to see him and reached out his hands. Jason didn't know what to do, but he got closer. Jimmy then gave Jason a hug. As Jimmy hugged him, Jason paused for a moment and thought about his mother. She was the only other person that had ever hugged him. Jason then began to shed a tear and hugged him back. Jimmy made gleeful noises and let him go. Jason couldn't believe what had just happened. He has never felt this type of love before. He then heard his mother's voice call to him, say, "It's time to go, Jason. It's time to go home." Jason got up and continued to look at Jimmy. Jimmy then pointed to his face over and over again. Jason understood what he wanted and knew exactly what to do. Jason then took off his mask and looked at it for a moment. He thought of all the terrible things he has done for years and never knew that someone would show him compassion despite his history, something he wished people showed him when he was a child. He then gave Jimmy his mask. He was happy to receive the mask and put it on immediately. He was filled with joy and began to laugh. Jason then smiled for the first time in his life. He then waved goodbye to Jimmy and left the cabin. As he left, the counselor returned to the cabin. "Hey Jimmy, you're still up? Where did you get that silly mask from? It looks so old and beat up." "I bet Harold left in here as a prank." "Oh well, back to bed, little one." As she tucked him in bed, Jason looked back at the cabin, then slowly walked deep into the woods. He laid his back to a tree and sat down. He grabbed his machete and stuck it in the ground next to him. He then took a deep breath and bowed his head. That was the last breath he took, and he gave up the ghost. Jason was finally at peace and would never kill again. The end.